Prophecy and Prediction by Eduard A. Meier, Switzerland.
Spiritual teaching symbol, foreseeing prediction.
My eyes and senses see things of the future which will take place from today, the year 1958, and therefore will be. Therefore I see and comprehend things through the passage of time into the most distant future, which still remains hidden from the earth human being. Many years will have passed before my prophecies and predictions have been fulfilled, and a new and better time begins. However, that is still far off, very far off, and much misery and need, as well as terrible things, wars, terror, chaos, and catastrophes will have set in over humanity and the world. Gigantic crowds of religious believers have always wandered over the earth, and also, in the future, uncountable numbers of believers of unbelievably many irrational sects will trample the surface of the earth, whereby some sect gurus will drive their believers to mass suicide and murder. They will spread everywhere like poisonous mushrooms, and their deluded belief will peal like a trumpet, resounding over the entire world. Sectarianism will bear evil fruit, and will cost many lives through murder and suicide, as also through politics and power lust. In diverse countries, hundreds of thousands of human beings will be murdered. For example, in the Soviet Union, which will be dissolved no later than 1991, and in East Germany, which will, however, only exist until the late 80s of this century, after which Germany will be reunified, whereby, in contrast, in Iraq, a war will be led by the United States of America, by their country's president. However, this will be without success, for which reason one of his sons, who will likewise be the USA's head of power in the third millennium, will trigger a second war in Iraq, which will ultimately lead to an unbelievable disaster and to torturing as well as to mass murder through U.S. armed forces and through the rebellious. Earth, human being, I see the great expanses of the earth, the almost boundless oceans, the great continents, gigantic mountains, the vast forests, bubbling springs, the flowing brooks, rivers, and all the lakes, and I see how they will all, at the hand of the human being, be harmed and made sick, destroyed, and will largely be annihilated. Centuries or millennia will not have passed when all that happens, and all that which is yet to be said in words of prophecy and prediction happens. Because the beginning of all the terrible things already started with the development of modern technology and with the terrors of both world wars. In the future, further evil wars will spread over the world, which will become so numerous that the normal human being will lose track. Through wars and rebellions, peoples will be exterminated and countries will collapse, and a new name will be given by every power to the land which is stolen under his command, whereby traditional names cease to exist. Many peoples, workers, beggars, civil servants, extremists, anarchists, and neo-Nazis, as resistance against the people hostile and corrupt authorities, will call forth misery, need, murder, and manslaughter, as well as terror, rebellions, and revolutions, as well as demonstrations carried out with Gewalt, and much destruction of much personal property and human achievements. Terrorists will spread murder and destruction worldwide, after which they will return again to their hideout and hide in order to hatch new monstrosities and bring death and depravity over humanity. The terrorists, warmongers, felons, prostitutes, and criminals will organize themselves worldwide and assume themselves to be kings and emperors of the world, while the people and the organizations for the maintenance of order watch powerlessly and have to hold up in order to protect their lives. As soon as next year, on September 3-2, 1959, using rocket propulsion, the Earth human being, that is to say, the Soviet Union, will make a hard landing of an unmanned object on the moon. And on April 12, 1961, an Earth human being will ascend in the sky with a rocket to orbit around in the Earth's outer space. After which, on February 3rd, 1966, an aerospace object will make a soft landing on the moon. In 1968, the outer fringes of Earth's space will be left, and later, the first trip to the moon will be undertaken, whereby up until the year 1972, 5 manned moon landings by the USA will take place. While a 6th moon landing, supposedly the first, July 20th, 1969, will be based only on a worldwide staged deceit, with the reason being the political armament race with the Soviet Union. The time has just begun when the human being conquers the depths of the oceans and slowly the power of the sun in order to win diverse energy from them. And the human being is on the way, in the next decades up to the new millennium, to unlocking the secret of life, in that he or she will decipher the gene. Likewise, in the 80s of this 20th century, it will happen that the human being can be created through artificial insemination. While already, at the turn of the 3rd millennium, human beings and animals will be able to be cloned from single cells without any actual act of procreation. At the close of the 2nd millennium, the human being will already be busy with the first far-reaching steps in the genetic manipulation of flora and fauna. After which, in the 3rd millennium, genetic manipulation will begin on the human being. The end of the 2nd millennium will, on one hand, be marked by very rapidly establishing computer technology, and on the other hand, by rebellion and a great war, which will be called the First Gulf War, which, right after the beginning of the 3rd millennium, will be followed by a second Gulf War, triggered by the USA, which has already believed since the First World War that it is the world police, and also wants to achieve world control. Towards the end of the 2nd millennium, and at the beginning of the 3rd, the human being will take himself or herself for the creation, and, on the entire earth, mightfully cause terribleness and bring destruction in the whole of nature. And the time is already coming when the peoples will begin to mix, and when many human beings will flee from their homeland countries to find shelter somewhere else in foreign countries. And there will be many refugees who have to struggle to maintain their lives, while very many others creep into the structures of the better-positioned countries as economic refugees. Prostitution is already on the way worldwide to becoming a public and officially sanctioned enterprise, which cannot be inhibited, and which will be accountable to the state for taxes. In this regard, ethics will no longer have a role to play, any more than will decency and health. Because of the unrestricted prostitution, in about 25 years, an already embryonic deadly epidemic will develop worldwide that will be named AIDS and will ultimately cost several 100 million human lives. Also, child prostitution is increasing in monstrous measure, as is the sexual murder of women and children. The human trafficking of children and women regarding prostitution has now already become an everyday occurrence, as it will later for the purpose of organ trafficking. Yet this terrible thing will continue to increase until the turn of the millennium and into the 3rd millennium, because organ transplantation from human being to human being will soon already in a few years become an everyday occurrence for the Earth human being. Already, in a few years, marriage between man and woman will only be formed for appearances, without a binding love. Rather, they will be only joined together out of personal interests of the individual partners. Consequently, the marriage union will just be lies and deception, and will no longer be permanent. Consequently, marriages will increasingly end in divorce. Also, the whole of nature will rise up, and indeed against the human being and his/her irresponsible machinations with which he/she disturbs the course of the natural things, as well as of the flora and fauna and of all life. Storms, ranging from severe to the severest will, from now on until far into the third millennium, bring unspeakably much misery, need, and suffering to human beings, as has never happened since time immemorial. The most severe earthquakes and seaquakes will take effect with primeval-like enormity and demand millions of human lives, as also will deluge-like masses of rain that evoke monstrous flooding and cause mighty destruction, as the human being overall has never before experienced or seen. And that which arises in the last 42 years of the second millennium, along with very many other terrible things, along with chaos, ghastliness, and catastrophes that are not mentioned here, all carries on into the third millennium as well, and exacts its tribute all around. And when the second millennium comes to an end, then the human being stands in the darkness of his/her existence, in that he or she wanders around as if in an impenetrable labyrinth, out of which he or she can no longer find his or her way, because it will be deep night in his or her consciousness, whereby, however, the threatening red-hot and fiery clutches of religions and sects lie in wait. And the religions and sects shake with anger, because the believers who finally want to turn to the truth run away from them. Yet the fiery clutches of the religions and sects, religious power plays reach for the young human beings in order to burn them in the flames of religious fanaticism and make them incapable of escape. The spirit must. May the young human beings protect themselves from the lies and irrational teaching of the religions and sects, as their ghastly anger, with which they gather believers around themselves with lies and deceit, will know no bounds. Even now, and even more so in the third millennium, the human being knows, deep within himself or herself, that he or she must not turn to religions and sects, rather the effective truth, the creational truth, as well as the creational laws and recommendations. Yet although she hears the voice of the truth in himself herself, he or she does not want to hear it, because he or she is tormented by religious anxiety and cannot free himself or herself from his or her religious or sectarian belief, because he or she expects a divine punishment for that, were he or she to do that. And if the human being searches for the effective truth, she will be led into delusion and deceived. Because in the third millennium, even more than in the second, there will be innumerable sectarians who ply a lucrative trade with irrational teachings, and thereby make horrendous profits. Also, the simple human being himself, herself, as well as the rich, will only see his or her mammon, count it, and strive for wealth, luxury, enjoyments, and holidays, while the authorities and the administrative bodies will exploit the citizen with all kinds of new excises and taxes. In the third millennium, the Moloch Mammon will bring forth very much worse blooms than in the 20th century, because the immorality and the felony, as well as white-collar criminality and warmongery, and so on, will no longer recognize any boundaries when it comes to hoarding mammon. Criminal business leaders will feather their nests with million-dollar payments and million-dollar golden handshakes, and engage in maladministration, and thereby drive quite traditional companies to ruin. As also the citizens will privately go bankrupt when they can no longer control their finances, because they are driven away from reliable money and are equipped with plastic money in the form of plastic cards, with which they live beyond their means, pay for all kinds of things on credit, and get into horrendous debt, whereby also special companies come into existence for the administration of plastic cards, while the banks will be in on making their customers dependent with plastic cards, which will then be called credit cards, whereby they quite particularly have their eye set on the youth, who thereby pile up immense mountains of debt, which drives them into need and misery. The fire of maladministration spreads itself constantly, also in the inept governments, which, likewise engaging in maladministration, manage their own countries into ruin when they accrue such immense debts that they rise in such a form that the country must be declared bankrupt. And it would be that even before the time of the third millennium, and indeed in 1993, a political and commercial European dictatorship will arise that will be called the European Union, and
in evil,
will bear the number 666, because through it, the citizens of all member countries will ultimately be brought under total control through biometric data in identification devices and in the form of small data chips in the head or body inserted in a biometric identification system that will be overseen and controlled through a central data bank, whereby finally the whereabouts of every human being can be exactly determined to the meter. First, the USA and later the European Union will introduce this modern human enslavement, after which other countries will also follow, with Switzerland leading the way, whereby, through this process, the personal and national citizens' human rights will be drastically cut back, which fundamentally will be already planned at the construction of the European Union, whereby the citizen is finally incapacitated and is to be governed only by the authorities, without having a right to a say regarding any government things and decisions. The morals of very many human beings will completely sink, whereby many villages and every city will be a Sodom and Gomorrah, because the prostitution of adults and children will take on completely boundless forms. Many young human beings will, in every kind and wise, fall to extremism in everyday life, as well as in their professional life, whereby pathological craving for drugs, medications, alcohol, and narcotics will take the upper hand. Many young human beings will run to extreme radical skinhead and neo-Nazi fronts and wave their flags, and form corresponding organizations that cause much harm and terribleness, indiscriminately attack innocent human beings on the streets, and not seldom beat them until they are cripples. In the coming time, many blood banks will be contaminated by viruses, and will make human beings sick, and will kill them if the blood is transfunded. Correct equals transfused, transfusion neared. According to data from the pleasure end linguists for the German and Latin languages, towards the end of the 20th century, in distant solar systems, new planets will continuously be discovered, which, however, can bear no human life. New solar satellites will also be discovered in our solar system that move far outside the orbit of Pluto, yet that will only be after the turn of the millennium. Already in 20 years, the time will come in which newly serious, rampantly spreading diseases, deadly for the human being, come about, especially in Africa, as also, however, in other countries, and, in part, there will be no cure for them. Furthermore, great famines will spread in the Third World, whereas in the wealthy, industrialized countries, gigantic warehouses are stored with cans and miscellaneous groceries, while farmers senselessly destroy fruit and vegetables and so on, because they don't want to sell their wares at affordable prices, because their greed for money and wealth will know no bounds. For which reason, they will also sell off their land and their worldly possessions for jingling coins, in order to live from that instead of still having a decent job. Human beings will be increasingly unrestrainedly addicted to greed for money and wealth, whereby even murder of parents will be secretly and unsolvably committed in order to inherit from them. It comes about ever more frequently that mothers murder their children at birth or abandon them, while uncaring parents beat their children to death, as well as leave them to die of thirst and starve. In the future, many families will be destroyed because fathers or mothers live in endless strife, which often also leads to the fathers or mothers murdering all the family members. In 30 years, the business prosperity, which will continue until then, will collapse and induce immeasurably high joblessness in all industrial countries, whereby not only many millions of human beings will be without work and be benefiting from handouts, rather, also families will be destroyed, murders will be committed, and criminality will spread. An unsuspected impending asylum seeker problem will break over the industrialized countries before the turn of the millennium and evoke asylum seeker tourism, through which a great many asocial elements immigrate who trigger a crime wave, whereby the worldly possessions of many human beings will no longer be safe, nor will life and limb. Through the insanity of his or her overpopulation, the human being has already detrimentally altered the world and the climate so much that an increasing climatic warming becomes apparent, which will extend far into the third millennium and will trigger monstrous natural catastrophes. But that will not be the end, because everything will continue in the same style, and at the beginning of the third millennium, there will be more than 7 billion human beings on the earth, which will lead to even greater terribleness and to destruction worldwide. Because, on one hand, nature strikes back in vengeance, and, on the other hand, the human being undertakes everything to destroy the entire environment and life. The constantly increasing mass of overpopulation leads to unconcernedness and the softening of the human being, whereby the true interpersonal relationships grow cold and disappear, while the masculine gender slowly but unstoppably becomes increasingly infertile. Through atomic contamination of the environment, through atomic explosions, atomic power plants, and radioactive waste from industry and hospitals, and so on. The entire life of fauna and flora, as well as of human beings, will be increasingly impaired and disturbed in health, while mutations of fauna and flora, as well as of human beings, will also come about in terrible ways. Neither air, bodies of water, land, mountains, nor seas will be safe from the human being in the future, because everywhere he, she will irrevocably destroy everything as he, she creates room for the growing overpopulation and for sporting purposes. So through ski lifts, mass settlements, mountain climbing, racing with motor vehicles and motorboats, as well as irrevocably destroying everything with monstrous domestic buildings which tower high into the sky, as well as with street and tunnel constructions, and so on. The human being will increasingly populate the earth, the air, and the seas, and take the living space which is for all the native wildlife, and thereby drive countless species and kinds to extinction. The human being increasingly elevates himself, herself, to commander over the earth. And already, in the coming 20 years, she will endeavor to strive for the might of the creation, for which reason she will no longer know any limits. But everything will turn against him or her, because he or she will errantly go through the world like a drunk, blind ruler, in delusion, hurrying himself, herself onward, and tormenting himself, herself. And at the end of her path, she will fall into a deep abyss. In the coming time, entire cities will spring out of the ground, and the countryside will increasingly empty itself of human beings. Human beings' order becomes increasingly unstable, and many will make their own laws for themselves and live by them. In the third millennium, the time will come when there will no longer be enough nourishment for all the human beings, which will lead to ghastly scenes of starvation and murder and manslaughter. Criminals and wrongdoers already spread themselves through the cities, and organized gangs will ambush, beat up, or even kill human beings simply for fun, or to rob them, because peaceful games and a normal life will no longer be enough for them. Not only will many human beings suffer hunger, but they will also be exposed to the cold, turn blue, and freeze to death. And it will thereby be that many rather seek death than eke out an undignified life in the bitterest poverty and begging. In the future, many human beings will catapult themselves out of life because they have a pathological craving for drugs, have become sick or old, and feel lonely, helpless, and abandoned, because feelings of neighborliness increasingly deteriorate to pure usefulness and pathological craving for profit. For horrendous prices, the aged will be put in aged care facilities, and financially, completely shamelessly exploited to the last drop of blood. Suicides become increasingly common, as will euthanasia, because enterprising felons will draw monetary benefit from it, whereby it will come to death tourism in countries in which assistance given to the dying with murder and suicide will be allowed. The death assistants will be dealers without illusions and will sell their suicide poison to everybody who wants to have it. The drug problem will become more rampant, whereby, worldwide, organized gangs of felons will maneuver even children into the vicious cycle of pathological craving for drugs. The bodies of human beings will be destroyed by drugs and pathological cravings. And at the beginning of the third millennium, a dangerous new drug with the name crystal will cause a furore among those with a pathological craving for it, and furrow and ruin their faces and bodies within a few months, and age them in such a form as if those with a pathological craving were monsters and 100 years old. Through selfishness, hate, revenge, lovelessness, virtuelessness, and pathological craving for enjoyments, and so forth, the human being's thoughts and feelings become increasingly cold, whereby the psyche and the consciousness and the morality are depraved. All those who have a pathological craving for drugs of all kinds which they drink, draw in or inject into their blood, will be like wild animals and lose control of themselves, and many of them will rob, steal, break in, and murder, rape, and extort in order to get the poisons to which they are addicted. Their lives will be a torment and become a real catastrophe. The already near future will bring a situation in which every human being will try to obtain as much pleasure, worldly possessions, enjoyments, money, and wealth as she possibly can. And it will be that even the parents deceive their children. The children, their parents, and the siblings will deceive each other if they can thereby gain a profit for themselves. Marriages will no longer be formed out of love, rather out of pathological craving for profit, for the sake of appearances, and as a consequence of false and short-term sentimentalism. And so it happens increasingly frequently that husband and wife will disown each other and divorce as often as they marry, as it once was in Sodom and Gomorrah. In the future, many women and men will go through the streets and into pleasure houses in order to take everybody and anybody as sexual playmates in just the way everybody or anybody likes it. Many married women and men will more and more frequently turn to other partners from outside the marriage. Thus, many men will sire children about whom they know nothing, and women will bear children without knowing the names of the fathers. And therefore it will be that every 10th birth is another man's child, and is foisted onto the husband. And it will be that children bear children, and that mothers will not name the names of the fathers. Many children will have no father or mother because they divorce or disappear undetected, because they do not want to be a father or mother, or do not want to live in a marriage. Because the order and tradition of a good and functioning family will be lost, just as the laws of marriage will have no more value, just as if the human being had become wild again. And as already happens, it will also be that, in the future, and increasingly, fathers will sexually abuse their daughters. Young and old, pedophiles, sexually offend against children. Women of every age are raped, defiled, and murdered, not seldom in all openness, and all over the world, as a result of an ever-increasing sex tourism. Men will rape men, and women will rape women, and children will be rented or sold via auction to the highest bidder by their own parents, relatives, or by child abductors. Fathers sire children with their own daughters, and mothers produce descendants with their own sons, whereby a mixing of the blood comes about in the same family, and through the evil which spreads itself from bed to bed. Psychical and consciousness-based harm is called forth, as does a state whereby the human beings do not truly know each other in true love. Rather, they only recognize each other through sexual practices. Because of their mode of life, and because of their thoughts and feelings, and their lack of virtues and all good values, human beings will have aggrieved, tormented, and emaciated faces, because their entire wrongly lived lives will be mirrored in them. The time is coming when nobody who speaks for law and order will be heard anymore, as it has already been for a long period of time, that none are heard who speak against the religious and sectarian beliefs and painstakingly spread the real truth in regard to life, the creation and its laws and recommendations, which will especially again be the case when, in the 3rd millennium, a German religious fanatic, Pope, will assume the pontificate, who believes, as a result of his fanatical belief in God, that he can save the world from its disintegration and downfall. Around the world, the devastating machinations of the religions and sects will spread out again, and innumerable false messiahs and false prophets will seduce the labile and blind to the truth masses of humanity, and newly lead them into the unreal, and many of these believers will carry weapons and build bombs, and in their fanaticism thereby spread murder by many thousandfold, as well as great destruction. The murdering and destroying fanatics of religions and sects will, in their death-bringing fiery beliefs, speak of fairness in the name of God, and thereby spread misery, need, death, and ruin. And it will be that fanatical Islamists carry out bloody revenge on the distant descendants of the Christians for their earlier crusades, when they accomplish their deadly and destructive acts through irrepressible terror all over the world. Booming thunder will crash over the earth, and deaths in their thousands will be rampant when the USA's felonious mightful ones of the state trigger war around the world, and when Israel's mightful ones of the state spread just as much terror, murder, death, and ruin as the Palestinians themselves, from whom uncountable suicide bombers will proceed. The male and female murderers of all kinds, in military and rebellious form, will be recruited all over the world from all levels of the population, and will be drilled into being murder machines, devoid of feelings and conscience, for whom also every kind of torture will be a sheer joy. Organized murder and terror commandos will live secretly in cities worldwide and plan and carry out deadly attacks in order to kill thousands of human beings and bring about unimagined destruction. There will no longer be any order nor effective regulation to protect the lives of human beings, because, through the fault of warmongering mighty ones of the state, the rebellious and religious, as well as sectarian and fanatical terrorism, will flare up like a bright flash in the night in order to sow death and ruin. Through the inhumane terror attacks, the torture, and through war, very many human beings will fall very badly out of control of the good human nature and fall back into barbarism, whereby everybody will scream for torture and the death of the next one when they are of a different view or act counter to the law. Thus, hate and revenge will spread, and even the order-bringing organizations will be maliciously attacked and prevented in their efforts to create order, whereby atrocities among human beings can increasingly prevail, and nobody hurries to help the other anymore if she or he gets into difficulties. Already soon, human beings will no longer align themselves with fairness, but only with their faith and blood, while the judges only exercise their office, such that the little man is hanged and the great scoundrel is released. Because true fairness will no longer be demanded. Rather, everything will be judged only in terms of money, belief, and reputation. In the course of the next few decades, children will be increasingly exposed to neglect because the parents more and more chase money and enjoyments, whereby the children are neglected in regard to love and upbringing, and are left to fend for themselves because they are thrown out of the house and family life like young creatures, and are neglected because nobody wants to bother about them anymore and hold a protecting hand over them, whereby they slide into scenes of the asocial, narcotics, drugs, theft, robbery, criminality, and prostitution. Worldwide, hate will increasingly spread, and the state's mighty ones' greed for might will no longer know any boundaries. Consequently, they will pass bad laws to torment the citizens, and from which nobody will be spared, neither the elderly, nor the young human beings, nor the children. Houses will be destroyed and plundered by criminal gangs, or the houses will be broken into in order to attack the residents, rob them, and even to kill them. Human beings will become increasingly unconcerned regarding their next ones, so they will also close their eyes when, on public streets, others are abused, women are raped, or children abducted. Children will become merchandise and sex objects. Their weakness will be forgotten, and they will be trained like animals, to be thrown away after use, or slaughtered and murdered, because human beings will no longer know love, rather only ghastliness. For a long time already, every human being will have known, through public media, such as radio and newspapers, that which is happening at all ends of the earth. But that will only be the start, because the means of communications and news spreading will spread rapidly, such as through television, through which events from all corners of the earth can be directly followed pictorially, as well as, however, through all kinds of electronic telecommunications devices that, via satellites, transmit everything, in word and picture, as far as the furthest corner of the earth. While in only 40 years, even the simplest citizen will carry a pocket telephone around with him or her, and will use it at every possible and impossible opportunity. Because of the constantly rising standard of living of human beings in the industrialized countries, they close their eyes to misery in the third world. Indeed, they see the starving children on television, whose eyes and mouths, as well as wounds, are covered with innumerable flies, and those who are hunted as targets, like rabbits by the murderous military, or those who will be killed to get their organs, which will be sold at a high price for transplantation. Many human beings will not only be unconcerned in regard to their next one, rather also merciless. Consequently, they will turn their eyes away, so they do not have to see the misery and the need of the next one. And they will not worry that children or adults die of hunger, because they will give them nothing, or only very meager alms that would suffice for neither life nor death. The better positioned human being of the prosperous countries sleeps on bags full of money, and what she gives with one hand, she takes away again with the other, whereby those needing help neither live nor die, rather can only vegetate in misery. The human being plies trade with everything that comes into his or her hands, and, as a result, everything has its price, even the water that is our common planetary possession, and everything will be sold, and nothing more given. Consequently, every gift demands a gift in return. As children will be hunted and killed for the price of their organs, for money, grown human beings will offer their organs for transplantation or bequeath them as a legacy. So for them, nothing more will be sacred, not their body, nor their blood, their organs, their consciousness, or psyche. Because if they could sell their spirit form and make a profit from it, they would do that too. And human beings will be murdered for treacherously, as well as by execution, while irresponsible doctors, in greed for profit, will cut up the bodies of the dead for their organs. Already, the human being has changed the face of the earth so badly that it can no longer be returned to its original form, and that will not be the end. As much worse changes will happen in the future if the forests are further cleared and the fields and mountains are transformed, concreted and asphalted into human residential settlements, because the human being continues to believe that he or she is ruler of the earth and of life, although he or she can never name might over the planet as his or her own, because its nature will defend itself and will put the human being in his or her place. Also, when nature defends itself against the human insanity of the planetary destruction, the earth will become increasingly naked and infertile, and the human beings are to blame that the air will burn because the ozone layer will slowly be destroyed. Because of human beings, the waters of the earth will increasingly turn into foul-smelling sloughs, and all life will slowly wither away, while the earth's riches will be completely exhausted, whereby all goods will become scarce, and thereby the hate that the human beings have for one another will increase, because everybody wants to have that which the next one still has. The consciousness, as well as the rationality and intelligence of the human being, will become her prisoners, and she will be drunk from religious and sectarian beliefs, whereby he or she will not notice that, through religions and sects, he or she will be increasingly deceived and kept distant from the effective truth of the creation and its laws and recommendations. Consequently, She chases after unreal, religious, and sectarian images and reflections, which hold her back from the truth and make her a willing sheep of that which is evil. The religions and sects fall upon their believers like evil carnivorous animals, drive them together, and hurl them into the deepest abyss of misguidance and unknowledge. And, to fulfill their entire goings-on, they set one against the other, in order to be able to rip everyone into their claws and deprive them of the life and the truth. As it has been until now, for a long time yet, the religions and sects will rule, through their representatives and gurus, in order to control and command human beings who are innocent and inactive regarding knowledge. Yet by and by, in the more distant future, they will lose their cult places, in which they preach nonsense and mislead and enslave human beings. And their time is coming, that they will hide their faces and must keep their names secret, in order not to fall victim to the anger of the people as a result of their misleading them. However, it is still the case that every believer, in truth, is a serf of religions and sects, even though each one erroneously believes that he or she is a free human being. Yet that will change, because the time will come when nobody, or almost nobody, takes part in the gatherings of the gurus, the masters, exalted ones, enlightened ones, the cap-wearing clergy, the popes and priests, and so on, because many of the people will rise up and position themselves against the religions and sects in order to conquer their millennia-old lies with the truth. The overpopulation will increase incessantly because of the irrationality of human beings, and soon they will be as numerous on the earth as ants. And when they are bumped, they will swarm around distraught and headless, so that they lose all control over themselves, and many will be crushed when they helplessly sink into the masses. In the future, the religions and sects will mix themselves as much as the human beings, who, through the mixing of peoples, make their own people into a multiracial nation. All around the world, peace will be hypocritically, increasingly spoken of, while mendacious and sectarian mighty ones of the state furtively stir up wars and make them break out. And, in every location, families and neighbors who have become enemies cause hell on earth for each other, or peoples and tribes who are enemies fight bloody feuds. Already for a long time, the human being has lost the way of nature. And that will still continue to happen very much more, because the human being believes in her imperiousness, that she is the master over life and death. In the coming time, human beings will more often no longer be satisfied with their own bodies. And so, they will submit themselves to all kinds of operations on themselves, in order to be better proportioned and more beautiful, as they imagine themselves, whereby, however, the entire business damages their health, and not seldom leads to mutilations or even to death. There will no longer be cohesion in families, and the family members will increasingly scatter themselves to the winds. Through beauty cures and beauty aids, human beings will fall prey early on to an externally old appearance, and they will prematurely have wrinkles and white hair like old human beings, because the utilized means will damage the skin as much as the increasingly dangerous and increasingly hotter rays of the sun. In coming times, many human beings will wander around in life without pause and be without leadership and direction, because, due to lack of love and warm-heartedness, as well as relationships from human being to human being, their consciousness, Thoughts and feelings, as well as psyches, will become stunted, whereby very many psychical illnesses and breakdowns result that not seldom will lead to suicide because no help will be accessible to these human beings anymore. In the course of time, very many human beings will renounce religions and sects, yet, in spite of that, not integrate themselves into the truth regarding the creation, and also not into its laws and recommendations, because they want to steer their own lives, as one would an animal, which can be ridden, even though they lack the necessary cognition and experience for that. And already the earth human being stands before the door that will enable him, her, to determine the masculinity or femininity of the embryo in the body of the woman, from which self-evidently the result will be that, eventually, already from scratch, the gender of the descendant will be determined in that the female egg will be fertilized in vitro with the corresponding sperm and then implanted in the womb, while all other undesired life will be killed off. The human being will increasingly take himself or herself as the creation, especially the mighty ones who snatch up all the land and worldly possessions and human beings just as they like, while the normal citizens become poor and weak and treated like the lowliest livestock, whereby the housing for the common people will become like prisons in which the human beings spend their time in anxiety regarding the mighty ones, and their hate unfolds irrepressibly. The hate in the human being will create a secret order of destruction that rages darkly in the human being and creates an evil poison that is directed at fighting against the authorities and, at the same time, at getting money and control over the earth for oneself. But in the end, the weak will listen to the rules of the mighty ones, whereby, however, it will be that laws will be passed in the dark, whereby the poison of hate is focused against the religions and sects, and the thorn of hate spreads against them in order to make appropriate space for the truthful truth. It will come to pass that human beings will become inactive, going around with an empty look and not knowing where they should go, because when the religions and sects disappear, they will no longer have any cult places and cult preachers and sect leaders who can lead them in irrationality and confusion, for which reason they will initially be without purpose, or like a germinating seed that cannot yet strike roots. Consequently, the human being will wander around without hope, destitute, made submissive, and will senselessly search everywhere for a foothold, which, however, they only find when they turn to the creational truth and the creational laws and recommendations. But first, they will hate and fight themselves, and hate their lives before they find the way to the truth. When the third millennium comes, many illnesses and rampantly spreading diseases will prevail, and many waters will be dried out and will continue to dry out, while other waters will become brackish or poisonous, or become a rarity, whereby many human beings will be threatened in their existences, and their lives will be threatened, which leads to them having to arduously re-establish much that they destroyed, and at great expense, they will preserve that which remains, because some farther-thinking human beings recognize that all that which they malignantly wrenched from nature must be returned to it again. However, the third millennium will also be the time in which human beings will have anxiety about the future, because the political, military, and environmental situation of the world will be very precarious, because the USA's and Israel's mighty ones of the state will threaten with war and destruction just as much as the rebellious terrorists will worldwide. In addition, because the human being has so terribly plundered, raped, and desecrated nature, that it will hit back with gigantic seaquakes and earthquakes, and with monstrous rainstorms, and primeval storms. Through the fault of mankind, through his or her overpopulation, and the therewith connected monstrous demands, and through his or her hostile conduct towards nature, and his or her destruction, as well as through the plundering of resources, the earth will raise itself against the human beings and quake around the globe with primeval force and sweep human beings to their death in their hundreds of thousands, whereby entire cities will be destroyed. The earth will avenge itself on the human being for his or her actions, because he or she will not have listened to the prophecies and predictions of the wise that warned about all the terrible things. Consequently, from then on, he or she must take into account evil threats from nature and immense destruction, because from then on, and until far into the third millennium, villages will be buried under mudslides, as well as snow and ice slides, while in other places, abysses will open in the ground and, destroying everything, will pull everything into themselves, none of it ever reaching the surface again. But still, the human being will be obstinate and will not listen to the words, advice, and warnings of the prophets and the wise. But that will be avenged, as immense fires will destroy great forests, villages, and towns, and demand many human lives, because the conflagrations will have primeval force and drive human beings from their traditional homes, which will be robbed by unscrupulous plunderers, as will also be the case in the villages and towns that will be abandoned because of seaquakes and earthquakes, and because of severe storms. And through the fault of the human being, who sluices chlorofluorocarbons into the atmosphere, the earth will burn, and melanoma and non-melanoma skin cancer will take hold and demand many deaths. And all that because, through human irrationality, the majority of the ozone layer, which protects against the rays of the sun, will be destroyed, whereby the atmosphere will be like a curtain full of holes, and the strong and burning light of the sun will burn the skin and will irreparably blind the eyes of many human beings. But the anxiety of human beings will, however, be too late, because too much will already be destroyed and annihilated by the turn of the millennium. Consequently, ever more deserts will overtake the earth, and the pelting down deluge-like waters will become increasingly immense and deeper, flooding everything and destructively pulling everything along with them. Through the clear felling of the rainforests, the oxygen level in the air will sink unnoticeably even before the third millennium, and well into it, which will have effects on the health of human beings and animals, while at the same time the pollution of the environment and pollution of the air will have taken on such forms that human beings will become sick from it, and the weak among them will perish. And in the third millennium, the time will come when big parts of the continents disappear, and human beings will have to flee to the mountains. Yet their sense of the catastrophes will only be of short duration, because they will forget everything again quickly, and therefore make an effort to rebuild many things, because they already create phantasmagoria through movies and television, as they later will through a worldwide interconnecting of computers and electronics, through which they deceive themselves and see things that do not exist and are only visually determined for the eye. Consequently, their sense for reality disappears, and they can no longer distinguish between reality and fiction, whereby they lose themselves more and more in the labyrinth of life. While those who create the phantasms commercially, as well as through religious and sectarian paths, have an easy game with belief-orientated human beings, who they deceive in every possible form, and make them into submissive beings, like cringing dogs. Towards the end of the second millennium, researchers will clone animals and alter their genes any way they like. And in the third millennium, researchers will have the audacity to create in vitro human beings who are intended to serve as human spare parts stores for organs. Even now, it has already happened, and it will continue in the third millennium, that the Earth human being irrevocably exterminates many animal species and their subspecies in the air, on the land and in water, because for him or her, profit is more important than the conservation of the fauna. As it already is now, it will also be in the third millennium, and indeed extremely increased, that children no longer enjoy a true upbringing, and their consciousnesses will no longer be educated in the frame of evolution, as they will no longer be taught the truth by their parents. So they will be increasingly unknowing regarding the truth and the teaching of life, so that they, like their parents, are without hope, unknowing, and remonstrating, and are dedicated only to enjoyments. Also, in the third millennium, the human being will become increasingly aggressive and believe himself or herself to be the highest might. Consequently, he or she will strike out everywhere in hate and anger, as well as in avarice and jealousy, just how and where it pleases him or her. And she will be strong in her evil thoughts and feelings, and her actions, which will have gotten badly out of the control of the good human nature, because the attained might makes him, her, unpredictable, and she will destroy, in a blind rage with howls of joy, much that has been arduously attained and constructed. Well into the third millennium, the human being will remain pusillanimous and a dwarf in the development of her knowledge and wisdom and love, and will be driven by power tactics and domination over fellow human beings, while her head will be stuffed full with unnecessary and false knowledge from irrational, religious, sectarian, philosophical, militaristic, and combative teachings, and from teachings of the thirst for blood, thirst for revenge and retribution, as it has been since time immemorial. For a long time into the third millennium, the Earth human being still will not know why he or she lives and dies, the meaning of death and reincarnation and birth, because, as it has been since time immemorial, he or she will wave his or her arms senselessly, futilely searching for the truth of the creation and its laws and recommendations, as since earliest times she clings to the religions and sects that cause her to whimper like a small child. In the third millennium, as has been since the earliest times, the believers of the various religions and sects will fight each other, because every believer wants to have the only correct God, regardless of whether it is named Shiva, God, or Allah. No, I see. Mighty, mighty boy. In some places, the earth will become a battlefield when Christians, Islamists, and Jews, and so forth, make war on one another, as it was in ancient times, and as it also happens today, as everybody accuses those of other beliefs of being unbelievers. And they all want to defend and spread the purity of their own belief with their blood, even when great powers stand in opposition to them, who question the righteousness of their actions. As is already the case now in the year 1958, in the third millennium, innumerable human beings will also be locked out of the life of the society, because many must continue to eke out their lives as poor, asocial ones, as beggars, as well as benefiting from handouts, because they will not be accepted by society. Rather, they will be outcast or unemployed, and treated as if they are subhuman, against which no authorities and government undertakes anything. Rather, they even exploit the poor and beggars with all kinds of taxes and charges, whereby they cannot afford a roof over their heads, and no longer have any citizens' rights, because they are outcasts of those who live in excess. And they will be half naked because they cannot afford clothing. And when they have something to sell, it will only be their bodies, their organs, or the way of whoredom. In the third millennium, many human beings will hear of the old prophecies and predictions, of the proverbs of the prophets, and the warnings of the wise, which have been handed down since ancient times, and they will thirst for retribution, and provoke the time in which the people stand up and call for the truth. However, before the people call for the truth, they will go astray in an impenetrable labyrinth, in which great anxiety and suspicion exist. And the human being will be restlessly driven forward in order to find a way out of the misery and all the need. The truth of the creation and its laws and recommendations, as well as the spiritual teaching and teachings of the life, will be spread loud and strong and worldwide. Yet the earth human being does not want to hear them, because only few who have rationality and intelligence will turn to the great teachings, while all the others want to possess more and cling to phantasms which they have concocted in their heads, spurred on by bad and false prophets in religious and sectarian matters. And it will be a long time before all these happenings come to pass, a long time into the third millennium, long, 800 years long, because only then will the seeds of the spiritual teaching, the creational teaching, and creation's laws and recommendations, as well as the teachings of life, slowly begin to germinate in the mass of humankind, because the humankind slowly opens its eyes and ears and honestly begins to search for the real truth. The human beings of the earth will listen and hear the prophet's teachings, because finally they will learn to see with open eyes and learn to understand one another, and each will become knowing that when one human being is beaten or is injured with words, that the other feels the pain. It will be the time when, out of humanity, human beings become one and understand that each is a small part of the next one, and that only unity gives strength, and neither skin color nor belief, rather only commonality and effective truth regarding creation and its laws and recommendations are of significance. And at that time it will be that only one single and valuable language will be spoken worldwide, and human beings will finally become true human beings. And at that time it will be that the Earth human beings have conquered outer space and travel into the deep expanses of the universe, when they have created artificial stations outside the Earth's atmosphere, in which many human beings will reside, work, and live. And it will be at that time that the Earth human being builds great cities in the seas, and human beings will ordinarily move around in the depths of the water and nourish themselves on all kinds of seafood. And at that time, it will be that human beings talk rationally and deferentially with one another, and they will accept the old messages of the true prophets, because their thoughts and feelings will be open for one another, and their consciousness and their psyche will be balanced. And in distant times, it will be that human beings will be many times older than they are today in the year 1958, because they will be hundreds of years old. And it will be that time when human beings recognize the power of their consciousness and learn the things that the true prophets knew and which, to this point in time, are still hidden from them as a secret. Therefore, they will open one door after another and gain immense cognitions and knowledge and wisdom about the truth of the creation and its laws and recommendations, in order to therewith use and develop the powers of their consciousness. And it will be at that time that human beings finally find their way out of their dark labyrinth, and will find sublime life bubbling again, like a clear spring. And it will be at that time that human beings learn again and make the spiritual teaching, the teaching of the creation and its recommendations and laws, and the teaching of the life, his, her own, and will be knowing. And parents will again raise their children and instruct them in the teaching of the truth, so that they understand life, dying, death, reincarnation, and birth, as well as earth and heaven. And it will be at that time that the human being will become greater in stature and more agile. And the powers of his, her, consciousness will encompass everything, and she will also possess everything that she wants to have. And at that time, it will be that the man alone will no longer be the ruling power, because from then on, the woman will steer the situation of the world and of humanity as true mother of the earth, because she will wield her scepter over the man and break his imperiousness, overbearingness, greed for might, and addiction to war, in order to end the times of ugly masculine barbarism and nip in the bud the man's devilish and murderous and overbearing acts, in order to finally allow peace on earth. And at that time, it will be that true love awakens in the earth human being, and this will be shared with all, whereby the existence changes into an easy time, and long-cherished dreams and wishes become reality, while the evolution of the consciousness takes possession of all human beings, whereby the true end of barbarism makes an entrance. And at that time, it will be that religious and sectarian belief will no longer be of validity, but rather only the pure truth of the creation and its principles, whereby the happy days of humankind begin, and the human being will find the human being again, and recognize and honor him or her as his or her kind. And it will be at that time, when the fourth millennium after Jem Manuel's Christian era comes, that the earth and its humanity will have its creational order again, and there will be true love and unity, true freedom and harmony, as well as true worldwide peace. And it will be, at that time, that the human being will hurry through the universe from one end to the other in great and enormous spaceships, and there will be no more boundaries for him or her. And it will be at that time that the forests, wetlands, meadows, and fields bloom again, as will the deserts, which will be enlivened and planted, and in which many kinds of trees, bushes, grasses, and flowers will reveal their glory, so the earth will be a wonderful garden in which the human being will respect and honor all that lives, creeps, and flies. And it will be at that time that the human being reconstructs and cleans everything that she destroyed or soiled, because from then on, he or she will honor and protect nature and life, because he or she will be knowing and wise, and thereby think of the future of the planet and humanity, to which he or she will give all respect and all honor in dignity. And at that time it will be that every human being is in step with every other, and one no longer harms the other, and human beings trust each other. They are no longer deceived, stolen from, robbed, and murdered. And it will be, at that time, that Earth human beings know everything about their own bodies, and the bodies of all animals, as they also will be knowing about all the things of the world and of the life, as well as the creational natural laws, whereby the illnesses and rampantly spreading diseases will be healed before they can come into existence, because it will be that every human being will be just as much his or her own knowing and capable healer as he or she will be for his or her fellow human beings. Overall, the human being will have understood that he/she can only exist and live in the community, that one must help the other, that he or she must give and must not only take, and that, as an individual, he or she must see and understand himself or herself to be a guardian of the planet, of humanity and the human order. And in distant times it will be that Earth human beings have learned to give and share in honesty and love. And that stinginess is every bit as much a means to achieve unsatisfaction as is reticence with regard to the next one, so that no loneliness comes about. But the human being must first learn everything and turn to the powers of his or her consciousness, and the spiritual teaching, as well as the teaching of the creation, and its principles, as well as the teaching of the life. But to enforce that, an iron fist is required, so that order drives out chaos, and the human being finds the right way again. And it will be at that time, when the fourth millennium after Emmanuel comes, that the human being is the bearer of the creational truth, and that all living things are created creations of the one and only creation of the universal consciousness. And that the creation alone is, and knows, the secret of all things, and that it stands immeasurably much higher than all gods and tin gods who, without exception, are of human origin. And it will be at that time that human beings remember the proverbs of the true prophets, and remember that which was once in all the past, as they will also know what the future will be, because, through foresight, they will grasp the events and the course and the change of the world, the humanity and the universe, as well as the secret of the life and the dying, and will thereby have no more anxiety about their own death, because they will know that the life eternally continues in alternation with the death-life, with the new life on earth, as the creation has determined through the indomitable principles which are unchangeable for all great times and are of eternal validity. Eduard A. Meier, 24th August, 1958, Uticon Castle, Uticon, Switzerland.